Alrighty, session 13, and let's get it. Welcome back to everybody who's joined on the YouTube things. If this is your first time, great week to show up. We're going over some more fundamentals through React tonight, not just the basics. We did that last week. Tonight is stuff that shows up in code reviews, stuff that separates someone who knows React from someone who thinks in React. So before we get into it, you know, want to just check in on how people's weeks have been. I know it's just me and CJ in here today. I know I just landed a job interview for Monday, so I'm super stoked for that. Um, gonna start brushing up on all of these weekly meetings that I've been doing just to kind of stay on top of my game, be ready for any kind of interview questions that this guy might have. So really excited for this. Nonstop been in the gym, still eating healthy, fucking just absolutely killing it. Um, How about you, CJ? You having a good week? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, shit. Well, last week we covered the fundamentals, components, JSX, props, use state, and use effect. If you were there, that session was dense, and I hope it landed. Tonight we're gonna build a little bit more on top of that. Here's where I want to kind of frame tonight before we dive in. Last session, we talked about how React is built around the mental model. UI as a function of state. Hooks are the API that makes the mental model work in practice. Use state and use effect were the first two. So tonight, we're going to be adding 5 more. And by the end, you'll have the full picture of how React components are actually built into production. Um, so we're also going to be doing something a little different tonight. Before the games, we're going to cover accessibility. This was one of our viewers' meeting ideas. So, like I said, your meeting ideas never go unseen or unheard. So tonight we're attacking accessibility. And I know what you guys might be thinking. Accessibility, is that really a developer thing? And it absolutely is. And we're going to talk about why at the end of all of it. So to start us off, we have hook rules first. Um, Click. So before we cover new hooks, we need to nail the rules. Because if you don't understand why these rules exist, you'll break them at the worst possible time, and you'll have no idea why your component is even behaving weirdly. Um, there are 2 rules for hooks in React, and there's no exceptions. Your first one, click. First one is only call hooks at the top level. You don't want to call hooks inside of loops, conditionals, or nested functions. Breaking that rule is just so detrimental. Um, Rule 2, only call hooks from React functions. Hooks only work inside of function components or custom hooks, not in regular JavaScript functions, not in class components, and not even in event handlers. Um, these rules, they do exist. These rules do exist for a reason. React tracks hooks by the order they are called. So every render, React expects the same number of hooks called in the same order. If you put a hook inside of, say, an if statement, sometimes it runs, sometimes it doesn't. React loses track of which state belongs to which hook, and everything kind of breaks down. Um, this is also why the React linter, ESLint plugin React hooks exists. If you've ever seen that ESLint warning about hook rules, you know exactly what is catching. Um, a good interview call out, are the rules for hooks? Um, Quick, short, easy answer. Only call at top level, never inside conditions or loops. Only call from React function components or custom hooks. React tracks hooks by call order. useRef. useRef is the hook that trips people up the most because it does 2 completely different things, and both of them are useful. So, the first one being, case 1, persisting a value without triggering a re-render. Um, the dot current property here is where the value lives. So you can read it, you can write it you can write to it at any time. The crucial difference from useState, which is like updating a ref, which would be like updating a ref does not trigger a re-render. So you'd want to use like the value persists between renders, but changing it doesn't cause the component to update. And you'd want to do this when you're tracking how many times something has happened without needing to display it. Kind of like sorting the previous value of a prop, keeping a timer ID so you can kind of clear it later. You then have, zoom out a little bit. Use case number 2, directly accessing a DOM element. You can attach a ref to a JSX element with a ref prop. React sets ref.current to the actual DOM node. And then now you can call, say, dot focus right here. Um, dot focus to, dot scroll into view, or dot get bounding CLI, get bounding client React. Anything you do with raw DOM elements, essentially. And you'd really want to use this when you're auto-focusing an input on mount, managing focus for accessibility, maybe even integrating with a third-party library that needs direct DOM references. Use context. So already, this one solves a specific pain point that you hit the moment your app grows beyond a few components. The problem is called prop drilling. Imagine you have user data at the top of your app and you need it in 5 components deep. Without context, you pass it as a prop through every level in between, even the components that don't use it themselves, just to get it to the one that does. Um, there we go. So useContext is that solution. It lets you share data across the component tree without threading it through props at every level. Um, there are 3 steps to using context. Um, First, you have to create the context, import it, create it as a const. Then you have to provide it at the top. I think we should actually still be on that page. There we go. Yep. Create, provide it at the top, and then consume it anywhere in the tree. So like right here. So user menu can now access the user directly. No props needed at any level in between. Common uses for context, like current user, theme, like light or dark, language, locale, cart state in an e-commerce app, pretty much anything that many components across the tree need to access. However, you do not want to use context if you find yourself putting every piece of state into context. Stop context. Context is truly global data. Um, for local state that on, for local state that only a few nearby components share, lifting state up is cleaner. Context is not a replacement for component composition though. So when someone like in an interview says like, what is prop drilling and how could you solve it? That would just be passing through props through immediate components that don't need them to reach a deeply nested child. Solution: use context, or lift the state and compose differently. Pretty easy solutions on that. Yeah, here we go. Scratching into the last two sections of React, we have useMemo and useCallback. Um, so these 2 hooks are about performance, and I want to be upfront with you guys. You do not need these for most things that you build. Premature optimization is the real trap, but you will see these in code bases, and you'll get asked about them in interviews, so you do need to understand them. So use memo. So use memo, memorize an expensive calculation, essentially. That's all it really is. useMemo runs the function and catches the result. It only reruns when the dependencies change. In this case, when players change, if the component re-renders for some other reason, like a theme toggle or whatever, the expensive calculation is skipped and the cache result is returned. Without useMemo, the filter, sort, slice runs on every single render if player hasn't changed. And then we have useCallback, memorizing a function reference. Every time a component renders, functions defined inside it are recreated. They're new objects in memory. This is usually fine. However, if you're passing a function as a prop to a child component, and that child is wrapped in, say, React.memo, and more on that in a bit, a function reference on every render means the child re-renders even when nothing actually changed. So useCallback returns the same function reference between renders unless the dependencies change, whereas React.memo wraps a component so it only re-renders when its props change. So without React Memo, player row re-renders every time the parent renders. With it, React skips the re-render if player or on delete are the same as last time. This is where use callback pairs with React Memo. You have stable function reference and memorized component, which means you have no unnecessary re-renders. So pretty much the rule of thumb here is you want to write code without these first. And if you have a measurable performance problem, then use React DevTools profiler to find it. Then reach for use memo, use callback, and React.memo, but not before. Last section for tonight on React and accessibility. Um, this Now, custom hooks are my favorite part of tonight, besides the games, of course, because fuck yeah, games. Custom hooks are where React really starts to feel elegant. A custom hook is just a function that starts with use and calls other hooks inside of it. The whole definition. That's literally it. But the power is enormous here. You can extract any stateful logic out of your components and make it reusable. Remember the fetch pattern from last week? All that state, the use effect code for loading data, we can extract all of it. So like, boom. Now every component that needs to fetch data can do just that. That fetch logic is written once. Any component that needs it just calls useFetch. The component stays clean and focused on rendering. A couple more examples right here. Long story short, custom hooks are the answer to how do I share logic between components without repeating myself? They are the equivalent of utility functions for stateful logic. Once you start thinking in custom hooks, your components get dramatically cleaner. Um, and that will take us to accessibility. Any questions on any of that real quick, CJ? Are you feeling good? It's a lot, I know. Right, yeah, it's just these are and that's why like I chose like some of these topics because it's the things that you tend to not think about on a daily basis, and that's why they're that's why I like reviewing some of them because they still happen. They definitely do. But yeah, we'll take it off to Haru's. She suggested accessibility, UI design, and dev handoff. So before we start the games, accessibility. And I want to frame this the right way. Accessibility is not just a checkbox you take at the end of a project. It's not just about screen readers. It's about the full chain from design to development to QA. And it affects every person on the project team. Um, Now, here's the practical reality, right? Um, if you're working on a real product team, as a developer, a designer, or even a QA, accessibility is part of that handoff. Design reviews check it, PR reviews check it, audits check it, and if you're job hunting and being able to talk fluently about accessibility, that also signals that you've worked on real products. So moving into semantic HTML or the foundation, that's the biggest accessibility win costs you absolutely nothing. Just use the right HTML elements. Um, you know, you don't want to be using a div when you're trying to be using a button. Doesn't make sense. Or a div when you're trying to use nav tags. Like just silly stuff. A button is focusable by default. Activatable with enter in space, announced correctly by screen readers. A div with an on-click handler is none of those things, unless you add them all manually, which is fuck that. So just use the right element. I personally there's two sayings that have stuck with me since the seventh grade of my tech ed class, and they are absolutely true, but not everybody can embody them, but everybody should try to. And the first one is absolutely the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. I mean, you're wanting to use a button. So keep the button there. Don't change it to a div. Coding is very, very self-explanatory. Making it harder on yourself is just unnecessary, which leads me to the second one. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I mean, I can tell you guys this stuff, but it's up to you guys to make these right decisions. Um, well, I guess there's three. Common sense ain't so common, which clearly. But then you have keyboard navigation. Every interactive element should be reachable and usable with a keyboard alone. Tab through your UI. Can you reach every button, link, input? Can you activate them with enter or space? If not, something's broken for keyboard users and anyone who can't use a mouse. Um, you know, I know that might not be such a big thing that we typically think about because all of us are on keyboard and mouse, but there are a lot of handicap or accessibility impaired people, and being able to use these type of features or not even being able to afford or have a mouse, it makes all the difference. So, focus management really matters, especially in React. When and how a modal is open, focus should move into them. When they close, focus should return to the trigger. So, just keeping an eye on that, as well as color contrast. No, I guess I don't have any more slides on that. Color contrast. So, like, the WCAG AA standard requires a contrast ratio of at least a 4.5 to 1 for normal text. This is a design and dev handoff item. If the designer spec'd low contrast text, flag it before you build. Don't ship it and then fix it later. One of the things that I had gotten from my internship was a book on UI and how contrast and the ratios and how certain colors show up on a chart and how you can, really display like 3D or lifelike effects to these shading objects to make them really stand off the page. It's a really, really great read, and again, for anybody who joins the Discord, that is absolutely readily available for you guys. It's like $100 some book that, I don't mind sharing for free. So, even though I'm not a UI guy, it taught me a lot. So as I go into these projects with my UI teams, it allowed me to not only just, instead of just sitting there quietly diddling my thumbs, not knowing what they're really doing, but to truly understand what they had going on, be able to contribute, and, be able to come up with my own designs on a new featured level that, I never really thought I'd be able to, because I just always thought I sucked at art, but it wasn't really that. It was just understanding it to a more foundational level. Um, so on top of that, you can use different tools to help exit to check all of these things like browser dev tools, accessibility panel, the X dev tools extension, Lighthouse audit built into Chrome. There's just a bunch of different tools. Um, Finish off accessibility, we do have the dev handoff angle. So when you receive a design file, ask, are interactive elements using semantic HTML equivalents? Are icon only buttons labeled? Are focus states designed? Is contrast meeting the WCAG AA standard? Um, and then when you hand off to QA, tell them these components are keyboard navigable. These are ARIA labels are in place. Um, run an act scan, and here's what should pass. This is the professional product development that you typically don't get to see or learn until you are in that field. Um, it's also just the right thing to do. Communication never hurts. Your users include people who depend on these patterns to use the web at all. So, with that being said, that is everything on the accessibility side, which means it's game time. So, since we don't have as many people in the channel today, we probably aren't going to do the coding. I'll probably leave that in the resource tab for everybody to take care of, but I am going to run through the multiple choice really fast. Um, oh, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I didn't want to just keep it was more so, because I'm recording, but yeah. But yeah, we're definitely going to run through the multiple choice. So what do you think the answer is? Since it's just you and I, so now I get to see how you would actually score. So why can't you call a hook inside of an if statement? And this gives me time to finish my dinner. Damn, I was muted. So what does this code do? And I said, yeah, B. And I was like, yeah, B's correct. Yeah. What Snapples. Did what was the last thing you heard me say? But you heard me during the whole speech, right? I wasn't muted for that. Okay, cool. I was about to die inside. Like, did you just sit there quietly for a full like 30, 40 minutes? Oh my God, I would have died. I would have died inside. Fair, fair. All right. What does the code do though? So yeah, auto focuses the input after the first render. What does what problem does use context solve? This should be an easy one. 3, 2, 1. Oh, yeah, no, this one should be super, super easy. Why? No, because it solves the problem of prop drilling, which this is explaining. Prop drilling. So, passing data through intermediate components that don't use it and just reach a deeply nested child. So, prop drilling would be going through all of these different, child elements just to access it, whereas use context just allows you to share it right across. What does use memo do? But yeah, so use context is always related to prop drilling. So use memo was one of the last sections that I went over tonight. I don't think they went over it in the course. And if they did, it was probably like dumb quick because like I said, it's these are ones that you don't really use or should like, you want to reach for at a later time if you have to. Use memo catches the result and only reruns the calculation when the dependencies change. What gave it away was only reruns it when players change. What makes a function a custom hook? This one should be pretty easy. Yeah, so a custom hook, the definition of a custom hook is just a function that starts with use and calls other hooks inside of it. That's the full definition. Yeah, so you can extract any stateful logic out of your components and make it reusable. Which HTML element should you use for a clickable action that doesn't navigate to a new page? Hmm. Well, I don't have anything there. I'm gonna go with B, button. So I guess it was C. Wait, here. Yeah, yeah, there's nothing even highlighted. But yes, okay, button. We knew what it was. It was button. Fuck me. Oh, thank you, AI. What should you use or when should you use an area label attribute? Yes, sir. Kaboom. Oh shit, we got another one. Um, what is the wide minimum contrast ratio for normal body text? Yeah, this is a good one to know. I I did go over it and I said it twice tonight. Yeah, I'm aware. Yeah, let's see. 4.5 to 1. Fair, 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 fair. What is the correct pattern for running async code inside useEffect? You want to define the async function inside and then call it immediately because you can't make useEffect callback itself async because async functions return a promise. And since they return a promise, useEffect expects either nothing or a cleanup function, which the pattern would be useEffect async function load, yeah, which is bumpkin bullshit. So define inside, call immediately. Boop. Do you want to give one of these a try? Do you want to give one of those a try? No worries, brother. Well, well, I know it is late for you since you're on the East Coast. I'll wrap up the video with a quick close. Um, But all right, that's session 13. Hook rules, call order, why they exist, useRef, persisting values without re-renders, direct DOM access, useContext, sharing state without prop drilling, useMemo and useCallback, i.e. memorization and when they actually reach for it, custom hooks, extracting reusable stateful logic, and accessibility, semantic HTML, ARIA, keyboard navigation, color contrast, and how it fits into the design to dev to AQ handoff. So you now have the full hooks toolkit. Everything from here builds on top of this. Next week, we're going to keep going deeper into React. We're going to be hitting routing, state management, and forms. Those are three massive ones that every single dev uses, from navigating to pages, from setting the state of certain functions to certain forms. We're really just going to dive into that shit and make it so much easier for you guys to navigate. We're going to figure it out together. If you're not in Discord, again, drop a comment or shoot me an email. Thank you guys for being here. See you next Tuesday. Yeah, keep ducking cracking. Have a good one, y'all.